This episode is the introduction to ancient Egypt. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about why I enjoy history. Ancient civilization is a large part of it. We're talking about civilization that existed so long ago, they occurred at the dawn of recorded history, that our understandings of their way of life and achievements cannot be based solely on written records, but have to be based on other artifacts and remains. These cultures are recognized as civilizations, but how they realized themselves is different from what we would expect later with the ancient Greeks or the Romans, and even our own civilization, to the point where they may seem alien and strange. Ancient Egypt is one of these ancient civilizations. This is a mega podcast, and it's going to be long, which makes sense considering I'm going to explore with you a civilization that lasted more than 2,000 years. There are several sources that I used as I learned about ancient Egypt. Several Wikipedia articles were helpful when I wanted to explore nuances of this civilization. Those are details. The Ancient History Encyclopedia was also a helpful online encyclopedia. Additionally, I tapped into several books. First was a high school world history textbook called World History Connections to Today. And I also referenced the Oxford History of Ancient Egypt. This was an invaluable source, as it would include both summaries of evidence and historians' analysis of that evidence. And finally, I've been teaching for a long time, but I was also a student, and the bulk of my learning comes from those experiences. Ancient Egypt is a river valley civilization that began along the Nile River. It is defined into two geographic regions. First, there was Lower Egypt, which was the Nile Delta, that triangle-shaped area of land near the city of Cairo. Second was Upper Egypt, extending about 100 miles south of the mouth of the river to the first cataract, or waterfall. The most important constellations to the ancient Egyptians were in the southern hemisphere of the night sky, so naturally they viewed the world differently than we do. If you get a chance, turn a map of the world so north is down and south is up, and that's going to give you an idea. There are several specific qualities of ancient Egypt that is influenced by its geography. For example, ancient Egyptians believed in a concept, and it was also a goddess, called Ma'at. This is a belief in the order in the universe, which is an extension of their experience with the Nile River. This river would flood annually, predictably, and unlike experiences in other river valleys, I'm looking at you, ancient Mesopotamia, it was generally not destructive. It was a daily reminder to the ancient Egyptians in the order and predictability of life. The pharaoh was responsible for maintaining Ma'at, and if they failed in this endeavor, according to ancient Egyptian belief, that is when flooding of the Nile became unpredictable, resulting in either drought, not enough flooding, or destruction, which was caused by too much flooding. This belief in the pharaoh's responsibility to maintain Ma'at is parallel to that in other civilizations. During the Shang dynasty in ancient China, along the Huanghe River, they held a similar belief. Their belief was that an emperor would be selected by the heavens, which is the gods, and if they did not maintain order in society, they would lose the mandate of heaven. Like in ancient Egypt, there would be physical signs such as drought, disease, and foreign invasion. The flooding of the Nile brought life to ancient Egypt. It's not hard to imagine why early peoples originally settled along the river. Animals, large and small, were attracted to the river. The flooding would hydrate the soil, a key component to farming. But more importantly, to agricultural production, was that flooding would deposit silt, which is soil that eroded from farther downriver, combined with decaying matter in the river itself, and all of that would be deposited along the Nile River. This resulted in fertile soil. This is reflected in the civilization's ancient Egyptian name called Kemet, which means black soil. Ancient Egypt was surrounded by geographic features that acted as natural barriers. It was not that it was never invaded by outsiders, because it was, but it did limit such incursions and isolated Egypt from the people around it. This certainly had an impact on its endurance and longevity. To the north and east, Egypt was bordered by the Mediterranean and Red Seas, respectively. To the west, it was bordered by desert, and the south, arid mountains. Again, these were not insurmountable, but it did limit such incursions from outsiders. It also seems to have limited cultural diffusion. While ancient Egypt was long-lived, it does seem to have experienced periods of technological stagnation when compared to that of nearby Mesopotamia. Again and again, it is proven that necessity is truly the mother of invention. Ancient Egypt was a long-lasting civilization. Early evidence of it as a kingdom date back to circa 3100 BCE to the king of Upper Egypt, a man named Menes, I've heard both pronunciations, who is given credit for united both Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. This was in what historians label as pre-dynastic Egypt. While the beginning and the end of ancient Egypt can vary from source to source, it seems generally to have begun seriously at around 2700 BCE, and it ended almost 2,500 years later in 332 BCE. You'll notice that the beginning date is an approximation, identified by the Latin word circa, where the end of ancient Egypt is a firm date. I found that this is typically a pattern when learning about ancient civilizations. The further in time an event occurred, the more likely that it is a best guess, whereas the closer in proximity to the current date, the more likely that it will be a precise date. The bulk of Egyptian history is divided into 4 periods: the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and the Late Period. Between each of these would be an intermediate period, which was a transitional time from one period to another, which often would last many centuries. These periods would be characterized by instability, frequently seeing Egypt divided under the rule of several governments, and foreign incursion, that means invasion. What is remarkable is that despite these periods lasting century, Egypt continued to be homogeneous, that means whole civilization. They maintained themselves. In the entirety of this span of Egyptian history, there were 26 dynasties lasting almost 2,400 years. The first was the Old Kingdom. This period of Egyptian history began at about 2700 BCE to about 2200 BCE. This period is noteworthy for pyramid construction and the construction of the Sphinx. There are many pharaohs that are worth mentioning. 2, though, stand out. They were a father-son team of Sneferu and Khufu, both famous for pyramid construction. Sneferu built 3 in his lifetime: the Bent Pyramid, the Red Pyramid, and the Medium Pyramid. Khufu built only one of note, but it was quite the pyramid. Yes, it was the Great Pyramid. A total of 80 pyramids were built during the Old Kingdom, which supports several inferences. First, pyramid construction is expensive. The general consensus among Egyptologists, those are archaeologists that study ancient Egypt, is that no slaves were used to construct the pyramids, which makes some sense. These were to be the home to the pharaoh's mummy once they died. However, there would be expenses. Workers would need to be paid in food, they would need housing, and they would need tools. Second, it supports that the government of ancient Egypt was highly organized. Tens of thousands of workers would need to be mobilized and directed to create such large structures. Building a pyramid would have been akin to a conductor directing an orchestra. Third, it required technology, architectural techniques to plan the structure, engineering skills and tools to ensure its precision, and tools and building techniques to make it all happen. Last, ancient Egypt had to possess a complex religion that was accepted and embraced by its people. Pyramids were being constructed for their pharaohs, considered to be a living god, one god, though amongst many in their polytheistic religion. It would house the pharaoh's mummies, though no mummies have been found in any pyramids, and this reflects their complicated belief about the afterlife. Eventually, though, outsiders and economic pressures would cause the Old Kingdom to collapse. The Middle Kingdom. After an intermediate period, the next phase of Egyptian history was the Middle Kingdom. This went from 2050 BCE, approximately, to approximately 1600 BCE. The Middle Kingdom was characterized by ancient Egyptian attempts at expansion and empire building. The pharaoh Senuseret III successfully expanded south into the ancient kingdom of Nubia, farther along the Nile River, located in a region along the Nile River in parts of two modern countries, southern Egypt and northern Sudan. It was during his reign that the Middle Kingdom and the 12th dynasty that he was a part of reached its height. After his reign, the Middle Kingdom slowly declined and eventually collapsed. There are several possible explanations to the collapse of the Middle Kingdom. Evidence from the period suggests that Egypt was experiencing periods of droughts where the Nile River flood stages did not reach the potential necessary for successful farming. Another factor was that several pharaohs had excessively long reigns, resulting in struggles for succession after they died. This problem is exclusive to ancient Egypt. The last pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, Sobek-Neferu, is significant in that she was the first female pharaoh in Egyptian history. While this is a milestone in world history, it wasn't enough to hold the Middle Kingdom together. The 13th dynasty seems to be populated by a succession of unrelated pharaohs. What's interesting is how this dynasty is represented in different sources. One uses evidence that the dynasty was unstable. I prefer the conclusion in the Oxford History of Ancient Egypt, which suggests that it was possible that the position of pharaoh rotated amongst several powerful Egyptian families, and points out that the bureaucracy, that's those layers of officials in the government, continued their work as it did during the 12th century. The dynasty was succeeded by two dynasties of foreign invaders known as the Hyksos, though there's some confusion to if they were part of both the 14th and 15th dynasties or just the 15th. After an intermediate period, there was a transition to another phase labeled by historians as the New Kingdom, which went from about 1550 to 1069 BCE. While many sources vary to the start and end dates, the variance between these is becoming more and more smaller. They're becoming more precise, which suggests the historical evidence, probably written records, allowed for greater precision. Sorry, I need to work on my enunciation. Another factor that also allowed for greater precision was foreign interaction that occurred between Egypt and its Near East neighbors, notably the Israelites, which were the Hebrews that settled in ancient Palestine, the Hittites from up in Turkey, and the Assyrians. In some cases, like that of Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, this led to military action. In others, it came in the form of trade. Ancient Egypt was exceedingly wealthy, both in mineral wealth, such as copper and gold, but also agriculturally. Centuries after the New Kingdom collapsed, the wealth of Egypt was such a factor in the Roman Empire that the kingdom was the personal property of the emperor, and Roman emperor senators could only travel after receiving permission from the emperor. Many pharaohs of renown in later history are from the New Kingdom. Notably are Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, his son Tutankhamun, all of those belonged in the 18th dynasty, Ramses the Great of the 19th, and Ramses the Great of the 19th dynasty. While pyramid construction was a distant memory, architecture and art during this period was still impressive. This would range from the evolution of art during the monotheistic reign of Akhenaten to the enduring reign of Ramses the Great, highlighted by the construction of the temple of Abu Simbel and the almost countless statues of him that dotted the landscape. It's important to note that Tutankhamun makes this list of notable pharaohs, not because of any achievements during his life, Because of his tomb was found intact, the only pharaoh's tomb to do so. There's a lot we know about this pharaoh's life and this period of the New Kingdom, which is why he's still remembered today. We know that he became pharaoh at around the age of 8, that he was married to his half-sister, Anaksunamun, and had at least 2 daughters. He died young, at the age of 19, and it was probable that his reign was dominated by his vizier, which was a combination of both a government official, but also his grandfather and / great uncle. So his vizier was the same person, grandfather and great uncle, who would make a move to take the throne after King Tut's death. There is some evidence to suggest that he may have married Anaksunamun. This would have led up to some upheaval during this transition in power, which would lead to the fall of the 18th dynasty that Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and that's his great uncle / grandfather, were all parts of. The 19th dynasty would not disappoint, as it would contain both Ramses the Great and his grandson, Ramses III. The Middle Kingdom would be followed by another intermediate period. What I find astounding is that the length of this time, for the next 400 years during the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and 25th dynasties, Egypt would be fragmented, with different fragments vying for control. The classic Egyptian civilization would become eroded, and though still recognizable, it had changed irrevocably. Again, enunciation, Mr. Howard. Eventually, as had happened on the onset of the Middle and New Kingdoms, stability resurged. The late period was characterized by Egypt's interaction with outside civilizations and empires, though unfortunately for Egypt, this was not from a position of strength. Egypt would come in contact with the expansive Persian Empire, first through Cambyses, who was king of the empire, in 525 BCE, and then Darius in 522 BCE. The Egypt of the pharaohs would never again be independent of foreign rule. It would be part of the Persian Empire until 332, when a young Macedonian named Alexander would defeat the Persians and liberate Egypt. He would become enamored with ancient Egypt and even had himself declared pharaoh. After Alexander's death, Egypt would become the domain of one of his generals, Ptolemy, and his descendant, Cleopatra, would struggle against the Roman Empire as queen of Egypt. With her death, the Egyptian civilization was done for. So there we have it. More than 2,000 years of Egyptian civilization. Keep in mind that this is just scratching the surface. Ancient Egypt was such a rich history of highs and lows, which still echoes down thousands of years later. Historians and archaeologists realize there's a lot we still don't know about this River Valley civilization.